Hello and welcome to this video on why a new bonsai should not be put with the rest of your bonsai collection right away, and instead have a quarantine period. While this may sound hyperbolic or dramatic, it is in some respects necessary and more so in some parts of the world. That is because the trees can carry communicable diseases, pests and parasites. To use a fairly simple but well-known example, Dutch elm disease. This is a disease that rather obviously affects elm trees. In fact, affect would probably be an understatement. It kills elm trees. It is a very dangerous fungal disease that initially starts with vascular wilt and that becomes fatal. It is one of the nastiest diseases that is going around that kills off trees. About half of the European elms and 3/4 of those in North America, basically USA and Canada, have died since 1910 because of it. That tells you that it's very deadly, and that is on par with something like the Black Death in the medieval ages. You rather obviously do not want this in your collection, and more so if it has any elm trees. This rather extreme example of communicable diseases is just that extreme. Most problems you will face are not that bad. But you need to understand, there is a range of possible consequences, from utterly decimating your collection to simply being an inconvenience you need to deal with. You can still get things like nematodes in the soil, aphids, borers, caterpillars leading to butterflies or moths, rust, scale, and more. These can be introduced to your bonsai without any warning, or, if you're not careful, preventative care. You can take the time and effort to remove them, but this is more effort than you need to go to, and why a quarantine period is useful. It avoids trouble that you just don't need to have if you just undergo what is ultimately a minor inconvenience for a lot of long-term benefit. Not all diseases are everywhere or a threat to your collection. This is why and when your familiarity with where you are is important. For example, Dutch elm disease is primarily Europe and North America. South America, Australia, and the Asian continent and the islands from there, such as Japan, don't have to worry about it unless they're looking to import these. Then you do need to be aware of it. And so knowing both the dangers within your local area and possible dangers of trees you might be sourcing is another reason to look at quarantine. This will let you choose which diseases and concerns to look out for. You can ignore elm disease if it is not present, but rust is, and so on. To do this, you will need a dedicated area for these bonsai. A large bird cage or an entire area, it is up to you and your available space and facilities. What you really need is somewhere you can enclose, and especially in a bug-proof net of some kind. That will keep bugs in the zone where you're quarantining new trees, and prevent bugs from where you are getting in. If something starts to grow in the cage before long, and it is covered in a bug net, you know it came with the bonsai. If you handle it right, the species will either die off without a new generation, or you can take the next steps to help solve that. Without the bug net, you don't know if what you're seeing is something from your local area that started growing there opportunistically, or if it came with the tree. Now that you have some sort of storage that is controlled, you can go onto the bonsai itself. First, we suggest a systemic fungicide and pesticide. This will deal with mold, aphids, and other suitable targets. Notable species are borers and fungal infections, as these can be especially harmful. It is especially important because it prevents contamination of your existing bonsai collection. We find that copper-based products are good for this, especially if you have trees that are particularly, let's say, pedantic about what they're exposed to. Copper tends to work well for these, but it's also not a perfect solution, as some species will basically be killed by copper-based products. So again, you need to have some familiarity with your collection. By dealing with things like fungus, borers, and so on, using these systemic treatments, you also ensure the tree is not going to get inadvertently contaminated, for lack of a better word, by other trees within the quarantine area. It would be better again if you could completely isolate them, but that seems to be a luxury rather than a practical solution. Having treated the soil and the trees systemically, you can then look at the soil, and ideally a soil wash, and that's the challenging part. In an ideal world, you would remove every bit of soil and repot it with fresh, known safe soil. This is just not always possible. Using a systemic treatment, such as something that you pour into the pot along with the water you normally give it, and it gets soaked up into the roots, through the trunk and into the foliage, means that the soil should be cleared out. Because of this, you can also use soil treatments that kill nematodes, grubs, and fungus. That is because you will find the fungus moves between the bonsai when it rains, birds pick up something from the soil, and bugs travel between pots. This is one of many possible different ways that things could be moved, and it's also why isolation, especially in something like bird cage, is helpful. Grubs, borers, caterpillars, and similar may not be treated this way necessarily, but it's better to be safe than sorry, and they may also not move the same way. Then again, they will harm your bonsai health in any way, so by removing them now, you do take away that issue of damage. Also, if you repurpose soil, they will also move, and you need to be careful about removing them or treating the soil. Nematodes are much the same. Soil treatments remove that concern again, but it's something you could be bringing into your collection or into your garden without doing this, and you won't know until problems start showing up down the track. Now that the biggest threats are taken care of, you want to rinse the bonsai, and this is literally washing the bonsai, but you especially want to focus on the leaves. This will remove any bacterial or fungal growth. Place the bonsai back out in the sun and let it dry. The combination of washing and UV light should be enough to get rid of anything. There are cases where antibiotics of bonsai are warranted, but these are the very rare exception. Having used fungicides, pesticides, water, and light, the tree should be pretty much right to go. The last treatment you can use is white oil, and this will deal with things like flies, gnats, and similar. Ants are a good example of something that will be targeted this way. They have a particularly annoying habit of farming aphids, and they do this by literally transporting aphids to your bonsai collection and having them grow on them so they can harvest the secretions of the aphids. It's annoying, and getting rid of the ants now means you don't have to worry about that. Generally speaking, something like white oil is a relatively low impact treatment, but a good final test to make sure that everything is clear. Leave your bonsai in isolation for another 2 to 4 weeks. Fertilize it and monitor. If it is fine by the end of the 3 months, as it should take several weeks between each of the steps, you will have a perfectly healthy bonsai with no risk of disease. It is entirely possible to ignore any and all of these pests and problems. It's your choice. There are reasons you may wish to do so, but that's just it. You now know the risks and benefits. If you treat your bonsai every other week for these various things, you'll find that at the end of 3 months, you have almost no worries, and there shouldn't be any reason that the bonsai would be introducing new problems into your collection. That doesn't, however, take away the issue that you may already have problems you don't know about. And that is the last catch to this. Quarantine only works if your yard or collection is already secure and has no contamination, pests, or other things that are causing problems. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions you have below.